Welcome back to the Fox Files. This is number 16. If you're still with us at number 16, you are serious about gathering your information. That's good. So in 16, in this one, we will be talking about New York. And remember, this is just my opinion, but I'm going to be giving you a lot of verses, and we're going to be analyzing Revelation 17 and 18, those para-chapters there. And we will touch on a few others like Enoch as well. Remember Enoch, the book translated by R.H. Charles. It's included in the Ethiopian Bible, as I've said before. We've mentioned New York earlier, and we have taught you how to do the 666 calculations, as we are told to do in Revelation 13, but we'll quickly do that again. You take A and make it 6, B and make it 12, C 18, D 24, E 30, you wind up at Z at about 156. Write out your alphabet vertically and write out some of these words we're going to give you. We're going to be working on New York. You write it out vertically, give each letter its numerical value, and New York comes up to 666. So does Deutschland, by the way. We'll touch on that later. It's a little bit like bricks in the wall, old mud bricks in Abraham's time. Quite often they would mark the bricks, and these bricks in this big project has markers you can identify. And the 666 system has been around a long time. I didn't invent that. That's been around for ages. And you can use that 666 system. Run some words through it, see what you come up with. Now in the book of Revelation in chapter 17, may as well go straight for it. In verse 18, it tells you it is a city. So we'll get that out of the way first. It's a city. It's a big pond in the swamp, if you like. So this city is the head of a beast, I guess, and it goes back through Rome and right back. 5 have fallen, one is, and one is to come. So this city represents the dominance over the earth. This city has been in bed with the kings of the earth. It is a whore that wears a number on its forehead. That number is probably 666. It has 10 horns. We will be getting to these 10 horns. They are boundaryless kings. You can read about them in verse 12. Remember, we are in chapter 17 of Revelation. It is explaining to us a little about this whore city that is hostile to Christ. Verse 14, you'll get that. So have your pen and paper. You'll be busy through this. And then you can go off and read it yourself. This city dominates the nations. Verse 15. Now these 10 horns, I believe them to be 10 billionaires. They are boundaryless kings. They control how you think and what you need, I imagine. Now this empire that this sits over was before, is not, that'll represent hidden, and is to come. That's in verse 8. Remember? Before, is not, and is to come. Now I use the old version of the King James Bible. I also have new ones, but I prefer the old. They haven't molested the language too much, and in the old one, and you can go back and see in some cases, how it hasn't been changed. And there's a fine instance of that we'll get to towards the end of this chapter. So it is a evil city that's been in bed with the merchants of the earth. So chapter 17 will tell you it is a city without any doubt. Then we move into chapter 18, talking about the fall of this city. Now, the fall of this city, I believe, is taking place at the end of the 7th week in the apocalypse of weeks in the book of Enoch, which you can find in chapter 93, verse 9. Now, you might have to look that up, but make sure you get the R.H. Charles version. That's done by Oxford. The swamp again, remember. And it talks about this 7th week. Also, at the end of the 7th week, the people get instruction in sevenfold, because the magnitude of everything is so great they can't understand. Revelation has got sevens all through it everywhere, and Revelation is a big part of it all, I believe. And the leaders are punished, if you want to, while you're in Enoch, so they know they're playing for keeps. You can read that in chapter 63, verse 11, and their punishment comes fast, if you want to read verse 4, like a woman's labor pains, a woman in travail. That is in Enoch. So, now that week, that final week in the apocalypse of weeks, what are these weeks? Well, a week is, in this case, a week of jubilees. So we're looking at a jubilee being 7 sevens, which is 49, and then the year of jubilees, so that makes it 50 years. So 7 of them is 350 years. So I think it's about 350 years old, New York, roughly, and probably about 350 years ago that they were putting their first slave markets around the bottom of Wall Street there, and Wall Street is still there trying to live off other people's toil through its parasitic nature. So if we go into chapter 18, so this is looking, to me, all pointers point towards New York. We can read where she has been in bed with the kings and the merchants of the earth. Chapter 18 we are in now of Revelation. You can read that in verse 2. If you slip down a little to verse 4, you will see where God is telling his people to come out of this whore-like city, because she is going to get dished up double for everything she is dished up to the rest of the world. She is a queen, she thinks, in verse 7, and is too big to punish, too important. Well, she's in for a shock. The merchants eventually see her fall from afar and wail. You can read that in verse 16. During her demise, leading up to the final major stage of her fall, she loses her manufacturing. You can read that in verse 22 of chapter 18. Then the violence is kicked into gear. This is a little bit of an enigma, this one. A millstone-like thing is thrown into the sea. So John sees something like a great millstone thrown into the sea, and with violence she is brought down. Now I found it a coincidence that if you have a look at an illustration of a Roman millstone that would have been used in John's time, and a hurricane, they tend to look the same. So if a hurricane comes in from the sea and pushes water into New York and fills up them sewers, whose use-by dates were 1998, I believe, which is a Jewish Jubilee year too, and adds up to 666 3 times makes 1998. So its infrastructure had reached its use-by date, especially the one that is key to plagues, and it says she gets lots of them. So if you have a look at a hurricane and a millstone, my opinion is they are very similar. That's not saying, with wars brewing around the place, and this crew loves starting wars out of New York. Don't forget it is the breeding ground of the corporate swamp globally. Corporate adds up to 666 too. So if we have possibly a missile in the sea, something's going to cause violence, big violence in New York. Now this city is godless. You can read that in verse 23 of chapter 18. You can read where the merchants have deceived the nations, so it's the dominant seat of power upon the nations, especially the capitalist world. She is responsible for the decent dead, the war dead. That is in verse 24. Some Bibles say the dead in the wars, others say the sanctuous. So, nevertheless, it is the centre of trade and commerce. It is responsible for the chariots and the frankincense and the oils and all fine things. Wall Street and the commodity markets, I imagine. You can read that from verse 11 through to verse 15. Will tell you the trading side. Those parasites that live in the trading world, they won't like this at all, but it is wrote there, and time will tell. An interesting verse that tells me the violence that comes out of New York is going to definitely upset things over there, is these 10 boundaryless kings that we have been discussing, these 10 horns in chapter 17 verse 12, and verse 13 in chapter 17 tells us they all are of one mind. It also tells us they strip this woman naked, leave it desolate, and leave. So my guess is they're going to leave there and go with the centre of trade and commerce, which I believe is going to Shanghai. And that's going to leave that place turn into a prison for every foul spirit there is, every filthy spirit there is. And the birds fly out of us, so there is any mojos that's had leave, any angels of perdition that decide time to move, we're getting out. They strip it naked and leave it. And it is the centre of commerce and trade. It has been until that one hourly event that made smoke rise before sort of knocked that down, and then its demise kept coming, falling out of favour around the world, doing away with its manufacturing. The corporations strip, just kept stripping it. And it does say that its flesh is eaten away. Now what does the flesh do to a harlot? It makes it look attractive. If you strip away that flesh, it doesn't look so attractive anymore. And it's becoming very unattractive on the global scene. Only a few more moves to go yet. And the corporations have advised useful idiots to run down their oil supplies, weaken the place so that there's really not much it can do about this great change that's coming. Remember, it is hostile to Christianity. That is chapter 17, verse 14. Dominates the nations, verse 15. You will find all that. Trade and commerce, merchant city, in verses 11 to 15 in chapter 18. Now, we're told this is Babylon the Great. Not Babylon before, not just ordinary old Babylon. This is Babylon the Great. This will be the last one before it shifts to the one run by the Antichrist himself, by the look of it. And before they do that, they have a big war. And out of the war comes the peace treaty and a new money system. That'll be these digital currencies, and they want to get a hold of everybody under control before God gets back. The landlord's coming for his rent. They don't like that idea. And that is why they are gathering everybody up at the moment. And they want total compliance, total control. If they don't get that, they will turn off your money. And they're finished with New York. They're shifting from New York. It's a has-been place. And they are shifting from her. And a lot of people are going, especially a lot of other billionaires that aren't part of that 10, they are going to be very annoyed that they've been shorn like sheep when the time comes, I imagine. And you can see New York's deterioration now. If you can't, go and try and book into the Roosevelt Hotel. And I would imagine the newspapers of New York are watching very close at the moment at what's happening to New York. So that is New York. Now another verse that tells me, it was a verse that had me confused for a long time, and then 15 years ago or so, I started talking about New York. I knew it added up to 666 back in the early 90s, and I couldn't identify these 10 horns at the time, what they might be or how this would work. But now we can see, with the wars growing all around us that look like they're about to kick in, we can see this more and more so. But a verse in chapter 14, and it's 20. It's interesting sometimes how the verses with number 20 give you some information on the evil side. I'll read it to you. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even unto the horses' bridles, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So this is out of the old King James. Now that word unto means to. So that's saying blood flows out of the winepress from the city to the bridles. That's what it is saying. To, not up to. They changed that word to up to. And then people think, oh, how could blood flow at 4 foot deep everywhere? So that's not what it's meant. It's to the bridles. What is a bridle? Well, in my guessing, I would say a bridle pulls to the left and the right the head of the beast. The bridle is controlled by the rider, that one that sits behind the head. The beast don't see that very often. And he steers the beast with the bridle. So the bridles are politicians and leaders, the puppet governments. You put the bridle on the beast. And then the interesting thing is we have this measurement from the city to the bridles, 1,600 furlongs. So if New York is my guess, and I might be hallucinating, it should be 1,600 furlongs from New York to Washington, to the useful idiots that they have there at the moment. And wow, it's 200 miles. 200 miles is 1,600 furlongs. Not a bad call for 96 AD. Now, John had to write everything down in a cryptic form. Several reasons for that. If it had have been unwrapped early, it would have been destroyed. If it had have been understood and let's just say exposed early, it wouldn't have made it into the Bible like the other books that enlighten us didn't make it in. And he was imprisoned by the Romans on Patmos Island. So he's done very well. Now that is New York and a series of coincidences. Remember those verses, and I hope you enjoyed today. It's going to upset some, but it's just my opinion. I might be hallucinating, and you might not be seeing what I'm seeing, but my guess is you are. Okay, we'll move on. We will just say for a moment that you have to avoid the violence also. Now this violence, this wine press violence, is going to be all over the place. We've just discussed how it's going to reach from New York to Washington, and that is my guess. So I wish you well in avoiding it. Follow the instructions. It says come out of it. Come out of where you are in danger, if you've got any brains. So, yes, New York to Washington, as America will go into a civil upheaval, obviously, at some stage, I believe. If they don't, it will surprise the world. And New York to Washington, to the bridles. Okay, thank you.